Hi guys, and welcome to a Brushmaster video. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to be painting this fantastic brand new miniature from Raging Heroes. She is from the April 2024 release, and she's called Neferkha, and she is Neferkha without the hat and without the snake. So what I'm doing with this is, because she's sort of like deserty and obviously lots of oranges and that in the skin and all that, I want to try and paint her in a slightly different way. So what I've done here, I primed her in black, and then I've used two colours. I used Star Blue, which I airbrushed from underneath. So if you look from the bottom here, you can see the blues, which are going to be in a lot of the shadows. And from the top, I've sprayed on medium rust. Now this is going to give us quite a good base for the skin tone, and obviously we're going to keep some of the blue in these skin tones in the shadowy areas, so we can use that as a bit of a guide. And we sort of I want the light to sort of come from this sort of angle, so a bit like that. As you can see, I've sprayed it from this side. So we're trying to highlight very much her face and this side of her body, and obviously up this arm, etc. And everything on this side of the miniature around here, we're going to have quite light, and then we're going to move round into more shadowy, darker tones on this side. So to get started, I've got a couple of colours on my palette, and they are my medium rust, I've got beige red, and I've got a bit of sunny skin tone as well. So when we get started now, I've made a mix up here on the palette, which is my medium rust and a little bit of the beige red added in just to make it a lighter tone. Right, let's get cracking, shall we? So the colour I've got on the palette, I haven't added any water to it, but we will naturally get some moisture from the wet palette. So here, like I said, we're looking to very much highlight from this front side, but we're trying to leave some of that shadow colour in there. And what I'll do here, guys, I'll paint each part of the mini and each section, and I'll paint some of it and then I'll stop the camera and do some off cam. Otherwise it's going to be a long video and it's going to be a bit boring to watch. So with this first layer here, I'm not worrying too much about if it's smooth or not. We're just trying to get these lights in the right place. Now she's a bit sort of undead like, this character, so we're going to try and put some slightly different colours into this skin as we work along. But for now, we're just really trying to get the basic mid-tone in the right place. Like I say, I'm painting this in, I'm not worrying about whether it's blended or how smooth it is. We're just trying to get these first layers of paint on so that we've got something to work on top of. Because like I said, we want to make sure we leave the shadow tones, because that's going to give us our contrast at the end, which is what we want to try and achieve. But we also want to get a nice gradient building up on our light tones. So I'm just carefully painting this, trying to keep the paint on the actual parts, trying not to go over the edges onto other parts. As you can see here, half of her face is missing. It reminds me a bit of the film The Mummy, where we've got that sort of, half rotted away face that is probably going to grow back as she gains her power. And the paints I'm using today are all from AK Interactive. So I'll just show you a bit of work that I'm going to do probably on the chest area here. Let me just check my reference photo, which I haven't got. Can't remember if she's got anything on her neck or not, but we'll paint this chest area. So like I said, the light is coming from this front side, so this part of the chest is probably going to get a good bit of light here. So we're trying to leave, good proportions of the shadow colour, showing through where we want the shadow. And like I said, we're not worrying about blending here. We're just trying to get these colours and lights in the right place. So don't be afraid to go back and repaint bits when you're doing this. Alright then guys, so as you can see here, I've gone and blocked in all of this first mid-tone colour. And what you can see is, as I said earlier, the light's coming from this side. So there's a lot of this, her shapes of her body that are going to be in shadow. So as we move around the model here, you can see I've deliberately left this side unpainted. Okay, and what we're going to do some blending now, just to blend that first layer in where it's a bit harsh. And then we're going to mix up a darker tone to paint some sort of highlights over this, the darker shadowy areas. So what I've got on my palette now is I've used that original colour, and I've added into that a little tiny bit of our medium rust and a little tiny bit of the star blue. And we'll be adding more of the star blue in a minute to make those highlight colours for the shadow areas. So what we're simply going to do here is we're just going to get very little on the brush, and we are going to just paint the edges where the light colour meets the dark colour. I'm just going to create a little blend between the two. Because this colour is a little bit darker, it's going to blend the difference between the two. Doesn't need too much on the face because it's quite well defined and there's not a lot of real brush strokes in there. And I've deliberately made the face, as you can see, a little bit brighter because we want that to be the focal point of the model. But here we're just going to do a little blend under the breast areas. And that'll just blend nicely then into the shadow tone. So I'll just do these couple of areas and then I'll do the rest off camera. It's starting to look pretty good now. Right then guys, so I've done most of the blending on the main parts of the body, which is looking pretty cool. It's looking okay at this stage, but I now want to start adding in this slight highlighting on these shadowy side here. So I've got the mix we were using previously, and I've just added some more of my star blue into that, and it's turning in a sort of bluey greeny colour, which is really what we want. And I'm gonna try and really sort of connect any sort of highlights and midtones we've already got, like down this leg, just to make it not come to an abrupt end with the darker places, and then it can look like it's blending in okay. And around the side of this foot. She's quite a small mini, so she's hard to see a lot of the time, but she's very well sculpted. She's beautiful. So we're going to make this highlight in there. It's not really, it's sort of a highlight, but it's a shadowy highlight. So it's a bit of a difficult one to explain, but usually even shadows have some sort of highlights. So we're going to just pick out a few areas, like on the biceps here. So that she at least looks like this side is maybe in the moonlight a bit more. So now we have a sort of little like moonlight shadow. It's pretty nice. Just on, as we turn it round, we get this little sort of light, sort of like the moonlight effect. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to take a little bit of a darker colour, and very much the underpainting of this was black, so I'm going to add a little bit of black into that, maybe a little bit more blue. Now we've got a slightly darker colour, and we're just going to do a little tiny bit of blending around that what we've done already. It's only a couple of little places just to tidy up the little brush marks and stuff. Yep, and that'll be fine. So now she's definitely got a bit of a look of moonlight about her. Right then, so time for the next highlight. And what we're going to do now, because she's sort of like an undead mummy type creature, we're going to start adding in some more greeny sort of tones to make that flesh look a little bit more undead. So I've got green sky here, and we're just going to have just added a little bit of that into our mid-tone colour that we used previously. And we're just going to try and pick out some smaller highlights here. And we want to get our flesh sort of quite pale, but I also want to get this sort of little bit of a different feel to it, rather than adding yellowy tones and making her look really healthy. That's not what we want here. built up quite a nice, much brighter skin on this, on the head now, which is what we want. And we won't paint the other side of her face because we want to keep that slightly in shadow, but now we've got some nice contrast on that face. So we'll just paint the chest area like we did last time. So again, we're going to just look for a higher up highlight now, just at the top. I may come a bit deeper with that highlight on this breast because it's facing the light. And this one not so much. So we'll do the inside of this one here. And again, we want to really reduce these highlights. These should be a lot smaller areas we're painting. So these are actual highlights and not just another mid-tone. And we're going to try and get this upper part of the abdomen here. We want to build up some nice light up here. And then we've got this part of the belly. So we want to get a nice little highlight around here. Maybe just on that side, which is fine. Get a real sense of shifting in colour and shadow that way. Right, so we've got all of that first highlight on there, guys. There's just a couple of little bits I want to blend in again. So we've done same as before. I've mixed in a bit of the previous colour, and we're just going to try and carefully blend that in. And sometimes you have to go over 2 or 3 times with these sorts of layers, just to get the little blends nice and crisp. And I'm really just not putting very much paint on the brush at all, so we don't get any real build up of transition lines with this sort of layer. I'm just trying to get just a little bit of smoothness there in a couple of places. And a lot of this I'm just doing with the tip of my brush. I'm barely touching the model with the paint. Some bits are okay. As you'll see, some bits don't really need a lot of blending. Some of that layer went on quite smooth. And we did paint a lot less area on that layer. So it's going to get quicker and quicker as we go. So that all blended in. Okay, for this last highlight, this is probably going to be the last highlight we've put on. I've just added more green sky into this now, just to turn it that little bit more of that sort of undead tone. So it's quite a muddy looking colour on the palette, but hopefully it's going to be light enough that it will show as a highlight. but it won't be like a sunny yellowy colour, which is not what we want. I think that's going to work pretty cool. We can always at the end, you know, can always come back in with some glazes, which is what I'll probably do. We're going to put a lot less highlights on now because we want to really try and push the light to the top of the model. So this is a trick we do when we're painting, is to try now to only highlight near the areas where we want the focus to be on the model. So I'll probably try and avoid like the legs as much as I can here. I can definitely see the greener tones in this layer where I'm close up to the model. Yeah, the green colour's really coming through here. Right, so we're going to do a little bit of blending now, just a little bit, and then we're probably going to do some colourful glazes over certain areas. Right guys, so what I want to do now is we're going to mix up like a sort of fleshy glaze to sort of put all over, especially around these highlighted areas. So I'm going to take a mix of the last two colours I used, and we're going to mix up a glaze which is going to be very, very thin. Now what this is going to do, it's going to do several things. It's going to do some blending. It's going to help blend our colours together, but it's going to homogenise the layers. So the mid-tones and the shadows, they're going to come closer now to our brightest highlight, because like I said, I like to over highlight, make things a little bit brighter than they need to be, and I always have this in mind that I'm just going to glaze over. And I'm always pushing that paint, which is this sort of dilution. Oh, trying to clean now. So it's sort of like this. You can see there's very little paint in it, very little, and I wick nearly all of that off on a paper towel, and then I put several passes over these areas, and it'll just help to smooth things out. Right, we're going to try and add a little bit more depth to some of the shadowy tones. So I've done the same thing again here. I've mixed up a glaze, same consistency as before, but this time we've got the medium rust and a little tiny bit of the star blue. And all we want to do is some of these little areas, like under the boobs here where there's deeper shadows, we just want to add a little bit more depth in there. And again, this is adding to the general tone here because this is quite a muddy, dirty colour. So we have gone from that really nice orangey skin tone that we started with, which gave it that look of life. Now we're adding colours like to the shadows and the highlights. It's adding more of these sort of deathly sort of tones into it. So we're just getting a nice bit of depth in here now. And this is a bit like the glazes we did earlier. You just got to build this up slowly. You don't put big thick layers on with glazes, you just add very thin layers and you just keep adding them until you get to the sort of level of colour or transition that you want. Right, so we've got these couple of bones to paint in her face where her cheek is poking through. So the previous mix I had, I've just added a little bit of buff onto the palette now. So the mix is basically the medium rust with a little bit of star blue, and then we've added some buff in there to make this sort of parchment ochre type colour. So now we're just going to add a little bit more buff and make that quite light to finish these bones off. So we've just got a much lighter mix now, and this is all we're going to really do. Just these two colours are going to give us our bone colour. And we just want to focus this towards the bottom of the cheek. Right, and for her eye, we're not going to do anything too fancy. We just want to try and get a darkish colour as a little dot. So we've got a colour here from earlier which I mixed up, which was, I think, star blue and a little bit of black. And a little bit of water to that. Make it nice, thin it down a little bit so that it flows nicely off of our brush. And we'll try and get just a little dot in the eye. And that's not bad. One hit and we got it. Right, her lips, we want to try and give her a little bit of colour. So we'll take some of this original colour we had earlier for her skin. And we're going to mix some burnt red into that. So we're going to get this sort of pale skinish colour, this reddish pinky colour. We're going to add a little bit of buff to that, and now we've got a bit more of a pinky colour. So we're just going to try and touch a bit of that colour into those lips. Again, we'll only paint the bottom lip. And then we'll just add a little bit of buff into that again to get a little highlight colour, a little dot of colour in the corner. Try and get a little bright colour, so we're going to add a little bit of ivory so that we can just get a little tiny dot, try to, in her eye. Just give her a little bit of a sparkle if we can. Now, this has really just got to be a little dot. Anything too big is going to look just odd. So we've got to really try and focus this and just get a little tiny little dot here. Yep, that'll do. So now we've got a pretty nice skin tone. Her face is done. I'm not sure I like that dot in her eye, sort of wipes her eye out a bit. So I'm going to try and put this dot back in. Yeah, that's better. Yep, I like that. Definitely very cool.